Are you sick of politics? Does it make your stomach churn like it does mine? Statistically, we're pretty united in our nation in our frustration surrounding politics. But here's the revealing question. Do you think both sides are to blame or just one? I don't know if I trust any surveys that attempt to answer that question, but that is the important question, because if you really believe both sides are failing us miserably, then you want to keep listening to this video. I'm definitely not a politician, nor am I a journalist or professor or a public leader of any kind. I'm really a very ordinary Midwestern citizen. If there's one thing that's special about me, perhaps it's this. I've come to take the critiques of my former political tribe seriously, and as a result, I no longer identify with either party. My guess is that a lot of people aren't happy with their political party, but they remain loyal because they feel the other side is so evil. And my hope over the course of the next 5 videos is to convince you that both you and our nation will be better off if you become a more independent, freer thinker. That is, someone who steps away from their echo chambers and information silos, someone who intentionally seeks out the best information from both sides, someone who no longer identifies as a Democrat or Republican, someone who can be the aisle, be the change we need in this country. So here's a bit of my story. After finishing school in my mid to late 20s, I worked at a for-profit company and some nonprofits. And then at age 29, I started and was director of a 501c3 for 8 years. I then went on to start a for-profit business that my wife and I now run with the help of 3 employees. It is also worth knowing that I'm a lifelong Christian, so that means that I can't help but to have some suppositions that align with this faith. I was raised in a very apolitical household. Early in college, I started self-identifying politically to the left as kind of socialist even, but I was quick to say that the term socialist has been interpreted in countless ways, and that I was not in favor of the kind that placed the state in control of everything. Rather, I was of the species that favored democracy in the workplace, arguing that we need more corporations governed by the employees. Workers' self-directed enterprise was Richard Wolff's phrase that I borrowed. Businesses still competing in an open marketplace, which is actually a hallmark of capitalism, but businesses set up democratically with the laborers sharing not only the income in reasonable fashion, but also the decisions. To me, this felt like the best way to bring more dignity to people's work, as well as guard against a few people accumulating too much power and wealth. Not because wealth makes people bad, but because all people already have a self-serving bent, and as history has shown, when the proletariat overthrows the ruling class, they inevitably become tyrants themselves. No one is immune from abusing power. No one is without sin is the theological framing of our human situation. Incentivizing cooperatively organized businesses seemed to me to be the best way to guard against extreme power inequality. Even back then, I did not believe that perfect equality was attainable or even preferable. I just was convinced that extreme inequality was unwise biblically, which I still believe is truth. And part of my idea or understanding of justice was built upon what's a traditionally conservative standpoint, which argues that justice is about people getting what they deserve. I believe that American capitalism, while providing some measure of justice, which is people getting what they deserve, also was a structure and system that permitted a few to reach levels where their wealth snowballed and grew in ways absurdly beyond what those people actually deserved. My problem with this was not jealousy or the privileges of such wealthy people held. My problem was that these few people on the top, by siphoning off ridiculous amounts of finite resources, created a situation where many hardworking, ordinary people, also note that I never believed all people are hardworking, but were not being justly compensated for their contributions to society. And not surprisingly, these people on the top were the defenders of capitalism, a system that could be exploited to justify this kind of irrational accumulation by a few. So during these years, I was a harsh critic of capitalism. But as I've aged and attempted to learn and be a better listener to people of all persuasions, I realized I made a critical mistake in my younger years. I understood there to be many versions of socialism, and I became an advocate of one particular strand, But that whole time, I bought into a very unnuanced understanding of capitalism. I got mad when conservatives would make horribly simplistic and inaccurate caricatures of socialism, never taking the time to distinguish between what Marx really said and advocated and what the communist states, Soviet Union, Cuba, Venezuela, actually implemented. I felt like any reasonable person could at minimum admit that there were at least some elements of these schools of thought that would be worth considering and incorporating into a conception of good society. Nevertheless, I was simultaneously committing the same fundamental flaw by comparing my nuanced and informed view of socialism with a reductionistic and antagonistic caricature of capitalism. Looking back, this is not surprising because as much as I did truly care about truth and wanted to be impartial, my reality was like that of most Americans. I was primarily listening to voices in my echo chamber. I cared too much about fitting into my tribe. Consciously or unconsciously, I believe our human hardwiring makes us prone to tribalism and desperate for affirmation, which we seek by conforming to one tribe or the other. So what happened to me? Well, I started to become agitated with some of the very uncritical thinking I saw with those in my tribe. Particularly, I noticed a shift where there became greater intolerance for divergence from any of the tenets on the left, and my eyes began to open to how strong of an ideology it was. I found this deeply alarming. I was literally afraid for my sanity. I realized that to be a clear thinker, I had to break free from my identity. I started practicing new sobriety. I've been new sober for 8 years now, and it's been one of the best decisions. Additionally, I committed myself to looking for and reading the most lucid and convincing thinkers on the other side. And here's the big one. I realized that going forward, I needed to no longer self-identify with either side if I truly wanted to transcend tribal thinking. Once I started honestly looking for the best thinkers on what was the other side, I quickly discovered my error. There were powerful arguments in favor of capitalism, and more importantly, there were countless interpretations and advocates of capitalism. And within many of them, I found there was a logic that was compelling. I had to do a lot of deconstruction and reconstruction. It takes real courage to truly listen to voices that challenge you. And then harder still, it takes some humility to change your stance. Growth or change is painful, it's disoriented, uncomfortable, but there's no way around the discomfort. And in our society, there are steep social costs, but I've found that I'm happier living within my skin when I'm free from the confines of partisan ideology and at liberty to handpick and judge ideas individually. And there's another benefit from shedding party line allegiances, one that I can't overstate. When you honestly see and believe there is truth on both sides of the aisle, you are setting yourself up to be much more generous or gracious to everyone. You can see that everyone has some strengths or truths, or if you're more of a glass half empty type, you can at least recognize that everyone has deep flaws and errors, and that no one deserves to be glorified. The idea for this Be the Aisle campaign originated in early 2025 when my family and I spent 7 weeks in the Dominican Republic to serve with an organization to provide our children with this cultural immersion experience. I brought along one conservative author and one liberal author to read in the evenings while my kids did their schooling online. I think my appreciation for both of these authors, alongside being outside the United States and seeing how others view their government, economy, and culture, all helped me to look with fresh eyes on mine. And this silly idea sprung to my mind. If there were just a few changes to American politics that could drastically improve our nation, what would those be? What would make the top 3? And as I thought about these, I felt initially that the 3 that I envisioned could potentially receive broad public support. They seem like things conservative and liberals could get behind. They seem so common sense. So I wrote 40 pages articulating my thoughts. I had a lot of free time in the evenings. But then I thought more about it and reality set in. Even the most sane, common sense proposals that could have received bipartisan support in another era, are apt to be maligned in our current atmosphere. Before any real healthy policy issues can be reasonably put forth, we need enough reasonable people gathered at the table. And that is when I switched my focus to this Be the Aisle idea. What does it take to move people on either side of the aisle to a place of liberation from partisan ideology? I started scouring the literature. What I wanted was a blueprint, a strategy, something like a 12-step program. Instead, I found some helpful books discussing the reasons for our divide, and they usually ended with a chapter that tried to be optimistic. But I just felt like people were good explaining what the divide looks like, and a few authors gave some legitimate evidence as to why we're divided, but no one seemed to provide a robust pathway out of the divide. So that's the challenge I wanted to undertake. What steps, if people truly followed them, would move us beyond partisan politics? So these are the 5 steps I've come up with, and I've made a video for each step. First, the video you're watching now gives you the first step, which is just this. You have to want it. You can't just say you want to be open-minded. You have to make it a priority. You have to be willing to do the work, willing to look at how your beliefs really have been shaped and are being shaped, and willing to make changes. Second, you need to become aware of how our human psychology shapes our interaction with politics and practice listening to the best the other side has to offer. Third, we have to practice new sobriety. Fourth, we need to befriend someone on the opposite side of the aisle. And fifth, make the pledge. That video is coming soon. I've shared my story as an example of a journey of reflection and wanting. I came to a point where I truly wanted to be free. I don't think there can be any other starting point than this. Desire. You have to want it. You have to want to move beyond partisan politics. If you want it badly enough, you will permit your identity to be a bit more fluid than fixed. You'll recognize that you have agency. Agency is the key. You can change. You can be the change you want to see, as Gandhi said. In his book, Negotiating the Non-Negotiable, Daniel Shapiro writes, "Mindset matters. If you believe that a conflict is negotiable, you open yourself to opportunities for connecting with the other side and finding creative pathways to resolution. But threats to identity often elicit a divisive mindset that transforms disagreement from a workable problem into a seemingly insurmountable one. I call this mindset the tribe's effect. And to avoid succumbing to it, this chapter alerts you to its main characteristics and the emotional forces that lure you toward it." It's then up to you to look out for these dynamics and to steer clear of them. And I'll talk more about these in the future videos. The opening question for you, as it remains for me, is just this. Do you and I care enough to take action? Daniel Shapiro ends his book, Negotiating the Non-Negotiable, essentially saying that it all comes down to a choice. People have to want it. He writes, "If a conflict distresses you, give it the attention it deserves. The fundamental struggle of reconciliation is not with other people, but within yourself. Internal resistance is the greatest obstacle to peace, and no one can overcome that for you." If you want to free yourself from partisan ideology and be able to hold positions no matter what side of the aisle they fall on, keep watching these videos. Take them to heart. Pass them along to friends and family. I'll see you in the next video.